Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Daydream Nation, and today I've got a special episode with some guests, and we are going to talk about the Motley Crue album Theatre of Pain. Mike Ladano from Grab a Stack of Rock, how are you, my friend?
Good, my friend. Glad to
Good,
see you again.
good to see you. Steve Deluxe across the ditch in New Zealand, Rock and Metal Invasion, how are you?
Yeah, hey Peter, good to see you.
And Joe B, my friend, how are you going?
Doing well, and I wanted to let you know that I will forever do the bad boy boogie.
Fantastic. And power up. So, as we normally do when we put a spotlight on an album, we talk about our impressions of the album in the day. So, we'll be talking about 1985 or thereabouts, or our first encounter with the album. And then we'll do a spotlight on each of the songs or a couple of the songs, round robin. And at the end of the show, we'll give our 2024 ears synopsis of what we think of the album.
Hey, Peter. Wow, Motley Crue Theater of Pain. Jeez, oh whiz. Um, I remember hearing this at a youth conference about the time it came out, because it came out in late June of '85, and I was at a conference first part of July. So someone at the conference had it, and I heard a couple tracks. Didn't think a whole lot of it. I think we already were hearing "Smoking in the Boys' Room" by this point. You heard "Home Sweet Home" with the piano and all that stuff. But I remember I got the album after the conference at some point because I wound up going to see him, and I remember liking City Boy Blues a lot. But the rest of the album was just kind of okay. It certainly was not "Shout at the Devil" by any stretch of the imagination. But then when I saw him in August, with Loudness opening up, well, didn't take much for me to get off the crew train because they didn't sound so hot. And when you just witnessed Akira Takasaki and Loudness, yeah, they wiped the stage with them. So and they didn't even do City Boy Blues live that night. So I was really disappointed in that. But the rest of the albums, I don't know. I looking back now with 2024 ears, because I couldn't tell you the last time I'd really heard this whole album. Louder Than Hell stuck out to me. Use It or Lose It stuck out. I like those songs. Everything else just sounded, you know, what would become basically the same thing you would hear from a lot of bands for the next however few many years. And I don't know. I wasn't gravitating to that. Loudness, I really started getting more into Loudness at that point. And then, of course, later in the year would be Wasp's Last Command that would come out. So that was really where my mind was with Crew. Save Your Soul or Save Our Souls with Nicky talking about his heroin addiction and Fight for Your Rights, where they're trying to be civil rights activists or something. I don't know. It was an okay album. But it didn't take much for me to get off the train. So yeah, I can't say I'm very high on the album anymore, unfortunately. Shout at the Devil will always be my Crew, unfortunately. So there you go.
So, as I see it on the squares in front of me, I'll throw to you, Mike. What was your first impression of the album in the day or when you first got it?
I think my first impression was visual. Here's this band that looked really, really vicious and Mad Max and post-apocalyptic. And then they come out looking like this. And I kind of felt like this was a little weaker. I wasn't into it at all. I think it's very telling that inside this box set, which covers the first four Motley Crue albums, that was the only Theater of Pain picture that I can find in this box set. Everything else seems to be from Shout and Girls and the first album. So I didn't particularly like that. Smoking in the Boys' Room came out, and it was it was a fun video. I was very much influenced by music videos, and it was a fun video, but it didn't motivate me to buy the album. And I, in fact, never bought the album until 1989, so 4 years before I finally bought the album. And my first impressions of it upon hearing it were, sounds what I expected. Sounds like a drugged out band, kind of sort of writing some songs here and there, throwing in a cover, and sounding a little dead in the studio. So that was what I felt when I first picked that album up in '89.
Thanks, Mike. Steve, what was your first impression of this album in the day?
Well, actually, the thing with Motley Crue and Theatre of Pain is it's the first Motley Crue album that I ever heard. And my first impression was I was actually at my local library, and you could get records out back in the day, back in the 80s from the library. And so I saw it there, and looked at the back cover, saw a whole lot of dudes with long hair. And I think I'd only just started to get into hard rock and heavy metal at this point. So I probably was familiar of them because they were always in the magazines. They were, you pick up the, Metal Hammer or Kerrang or whatever you were reading back in the 80s. They seem to always be, a Parade especially, they're always on the front cover, or they always seem to have an article, right? They were really good at promoting themselves or being promoted or being in the magazine. So I'd probably also maybe seen them in the magazine, but I hadn't actually heard anything. Never heard anything before I heard this album. So I got the record out from the library, took it home, and I was pretty thrilled with it. Actually, I thought it was awesome. I won't go into too much detail because we're going to talk about the tracks, but it's one of those albums. You know how you forget when you first hear an album. I can still remember the night that I took that home and listened to it, and just it blew me away. Yeah.
Okay, Joe, what was your first impression in the day?
I'm not going to be kind at all because, well, first of all, I think it's confirmed I had the first copy of Too Fast for Love in the Chicago area. I did the mail order on Leather Records. I used to get Brian Slagle's fanzine, and I did a mail order. So I had one of the first pressings. I still have it on the Leather Records. Loved it. Thought it was so cool, so weird. And then Shout comes out, and I was like, okay, now it's like brutal. This is great. We were all in. Then this album had a huge black cloud over it because of Vince Neil's drunk driving. And then this comes out, and so it had a black cloud over it, and it was not good. It's still not good. We were disappointed. We called it Theater of Shame. It had a black cloud right off the bat, but we were like, what happened? This band was going on such a great trajectory, but it had the black cloud because of Vince's troubles. And then I think, Mike, you nailed it the way it sounds. It sounds like a band full of drug problems. It sounds like a band whose singer was on parole, and I don't know if he was recording it and getting out of prison or whatever. It sounded like it was thrown together. There's a cover tune from Vince's old band, and Tommy Lee rescued the album by ripping off an Aerosmith song on the piano. So that's my first impression, but it did have a big dark cloud because of Vince's troubles.
All right. Thank you, Joe. And tell us what you think next time. Anyway, my impression of the album in the day is I didn't mind it. So this was like an entry point. And when you're young and impressionable and a teenage, you just, take what's in. And I think this was, had a little bit of swagger. There was a little bit of groove. But hey, this is 1986, so opinions can change over time. But look, I'm not going to lie. I didn't mind it. But I could sort of sense there were some shortcomings in the album. I was not a fan of Home Sweet Home. I thought that was kind of really cheesy. And it was very sort of out of step with all the Motley Crue, the image of being a badass, dangerous band. After listening to that album, obviously, I invested in the catalog and went back. And wow, those first two albums. It's got punkish raw energy. It's aggressive. And you can understand why they made a mark on the LA band scene. Look, I've got to admit it. I like this album in the day, and over time things change. All right. Why don't we spotlight a song and we can just have an open forum discussion, maybe a few counterpoints. I'll throw it over to you, Mike. What's the first song that you would like to do a little bit of a spotlight off Theatre of Pain?
You know, you caught me at a moment here, and I'm like, I don't want to come across as too negative, because I too am a Motley Crue fan, but I do want to start with a negative opinion on a song. So maybe before I do that, I just want to say I'm a huge Motley Crue fan. Too Fast for Love is a 5 out of 5 star album. I love it for its rawness. I have the original Leather Records mix, which was available in Canada at the time. For some reason, there's a story behind that. I love Shout. It's contrived, but it's good, solid, shiny metal. And I like Girls, Girls, Girls too. I think it was a better album than Theater. But the song I want to spotlight is what I think is the weakest song on this album, Use It or Lose It. I think it's just pure chaos. I challenge Vince Neil to sing that song today. You know, if he sang it today, it'd be like, you know,
Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan,
yeah,
anyone?
well, yeah, Vince Neil and Bob Dylan are they're coming together vocally, you know? They're colliding vocally. I hate this song. When I first heard it, I was like, how did this song make it onto the album? This is utter crap. I kind of get that in 85 it was probably necessary to have a speedy, metally song. Rat were doing a lot of that. Even Quiet Riot had some of that stuff on Condition Critical. But this is just craziness. And I think this is also the same song that kind of struck me the first time I heard it, where Vince Neil sings the lyric, "Street walking gypsy, Margaret Trudeau." And growing up in Canada during the era of Pierre Trudeau, I'm like, what the hell is that? Why is Margaret Trudeau coming out in a Motley Crue song preceded by the line "street walking gypsy"? And I'm like, oh, okay. So now as an adult, now I realize there were all kinds of rumors and stuff. And there's still a rumor today that Justin Trudeau is the illegitimate son of Fidel Castro. So I get that there was that reputation, I'll say. But it was weird. It came out of the blue, and I'm like, what in the hell? Margaret Trudeau in a Motley Crue song. And it just, I don't know. I just
with Mick too.
I can't remember, Joe.
I think she had a fling with Mick Jagger too.
She probably did. I have to brush up on my Canadian history, I'm sorry to say. But that was a bit before my time. I wasn't eligible to vote until later on. Anyway, I just hate this song. I think that it's utter crap. I think it's barely a song. What can I say except that Mick Mars is the best thing about anything on this album. His guitar playing improved while everybody else just kind of seemed to fall back into a comfortable, you know, we're Motley Crue. We know what we're doing. Whereas Mick Mars actually added to his style. He threw in all that new slide guitar stuff. So bar Mick Mars's guitar work, I will say Use It or Lose It is a crap performance by the members of Motley Crue, and they should be ashamed of themselves.
I'd like to add that, no, Mike, you're hitting, you and I are probably most 100% on the same page with this album, but you bring up these songs. I know a lot of these songs were leftover demos from Shout at the Devil that didn't make the cut.
Yes, so, that's right.
Yeah, what was
Louder Than Hell used to be Hotter Than Hell.
Yeah, Louder Than Hell was something. Yeah. So yeah. I think that's where we're going with our opinions on this album. But
I think the chief songwriter of this band was incapacitated, shall we say, in many ways, and just kind of threw a whole bunch of stuff at the wall and said, I wrote some songs.
Well, there's some conjecture, Mike, that Nicky didn't even play bass on this album. He was that incapacitated. So have you folks heard about that?
Well, that's sort of recent, not news, I suppose, but that's sort of recently come out. Some of the people involved with the production said that. And of course, it probably should be mentioned. This is also around the time that Matthew Von Tripe was pretending to be Nicky Six. Do you remember that story? The false Nicky Six. This is around the time that Matthew Von Tripe claimed that he was in Motley Crue, replacing the real Nicky Six. So that deserves a mention as well for historical purposes.
It deserves a movie, if not already. I think it's just a wonderful story in the sense it's just so wacky. Only in
really
America. But Use It or Lose It, it's the last song. Um, I think Mick Mars is interesting in the band because you've got a glam band, and a lot of the glam bands or hair metal bands usually had a superstar pyrotechnic guitarist, Dokken, George Lynch, Warren DeMartini, Rat. Mick Mars was very much a 70s guy. Jeff Beck, very laid back. He just does these little blues licks. And listening to this album last night, the riffs are very simple. You compare it to Rat or Dokken, it's very complicated. There's a lot of shredding. There's a lot of intricate melodies. Maybe the reason why Motley sold so many more copies of albums like that is because they kept it simple. By accident, or maybe by design, they kept it simple. All the riffs on this album are very, very simple. And that sticks in the noggin. I don't know. It's a theory. And I'm sure as we go over the songs deeper into this show, there may be a kind of a recurring theme. My complaint about Mick Mars' guitar playing is it can be a little thin. It's not a thick tone. And sonically, that doesn't sort of, it's not music to my ears. Does anyone want to counterpoint that?
No, I agree. It has to do with Tom Werman's. He doesn't flat out say it, but he said it was a challenge, and he said Mick and Tommy were probably the only two musicians, but yeah, it does sound thin, but I think it worked. It wasn't that thin on Shout at the Devil, and I think it added to the weirdness on Too Fast for Love, especially with what's the one song where he just goes crazy with the slide guitar. Mike, you can help me on that. On the first album,
I'm having a brain fart. Sorry, Joe.
Yeah, no, I'll think of it. But I think a lot of it is a combination of Piece of Your Action. A lot of it has to do with Tom Werman's production and his style. I mean, I thought it was cool that it added to the weirdness. It got a little heavy, and I liked it on Shout. And this is where it starts going downhill. I think it gets really thin on Girls, Girls, Girls for sure. But
yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, Joe, we'll throw to you.
Spotlight so I want to go. I want to go with Smoking in the Boys' Room, because if you read The Dirt and you follow the history of the band, and I've been there since day one, and I have a love-hate relationship with this band. They brought me joy, they brought me pain, they brought me disappointment, they've pissed me off. But Smoking in the Boys' Room, Vince is in jail or getting out of jail. He's on probation. Nikki is a mess. They have these leftover songs, and he's like, I threw out, I added the song I did in my previous band as a cover tune, and this got him on the map on MTV. I think a lot of these albums sold because of MTV and their look. So Smoking in the Boys' Room was their first single, and it kind of rescued the album. It did rescue the album because it got him some play, and then of course it took off at Home Sweet Home. But that's a song I want to put out there, and they're already going for a cover tune to rescue an album here, so you see what kind of state the band is in. But it's, as a cover tune, I think it's one of the better songs on the album. I like how he changes the lyrics and says, "My buddies Mick, Six, and Tom." But other than that, I think it's the song that rescued Theater of Pain.
Yeah, I don't think you're alone. I think a lot of folks think this is one of the strongest songs on the album. Steve, what do you think?
Oh, we're on totally a different page. It's my least favorite song on the album. I think they're trying to do the Quiet Riot thing. Quiet Riot had head-to-head covering Slade, and I just think they're going, well, it was a word for Quiet Riot. Let's find a good cover song that's going to, potentially give us a hit. And like I said, I really like this album, but it's track 2 on the album, so it was the second song I heard, and I was like, oh, maybe this isn't going to be that good, because to be honest with you, I didn't like City Boy Blues either. So the first 2 songs I'm not particularly loving. So it gets better though for me. So maybe yeah, I mean, before I'll highlight a song, but before I do that, I will say Nikki Sixx has said that he thinks this album is a pile of rubbish. That's actually a quote, and I think Vince Neil said it's his least favorite album. So I always think it's a little bit weird when, as a listener, you like an album that the people who made it don't like. You know, it's kind of like, oh, what am I missing? Why do I like this? You guys don't even like it. And you know, I know there's some, obviously there's some negativity from people here today that it's not necessarily a favorite Motley Crue album, but the thing is, for me, like, it was the first one I heard, and that often makes a difference. I actually really like Mick Mars' guitar tone. I think it's I think it's quite similar actually to Shout at the Devil, and I think he had quite a distinctive guitar tone. I don't think you hear it quite so much on, for example, Smoking in the Boys' Room or some of the other songs. But for example, the song I'd like to talk about, Louder Than Hell, man, that's a kick-ass riff that kicks that song off. And yeah, that's a really great example, I think, of the Mick Mars guitar tone. Yeah, it is a leftover song, so it's left over from Shout at the Devil. It was called Hotter Than Hell. And yeah, it's I will say lyrically, there's a lot of repetition, so the chorus is basically just louder than hell. They just keep saying that, repeating that. They also do that on We Need to Love It Tonight. That song, it's just the chorus is just We Need to Love It Tonight, and they just keep repeating it and repeating it, repeating it. And like you were saying, Peter, sometimes it's simple and it's repetitive and it gets in your head. And maybe for me, just starting out, with hard rock and heavy metal, that was kind of just what I needed, just to kind of ease myself into something. It wasn't too complicated, and just get stuck in your head, and but yeah, Louder Than Hell, I think's underrated song, and doesn't get talked about enough as a great Motley Crue song, I think.
Well, I think anecdotally, the songs that have simple riffs are the ones that chart higher and do better. So, I mean, we all love Dokken, we all love Rat, but maybe that's too complicated for the average listener, the average casual rock fan that wants to buy a single. Motley just strip it down and make it simple, and they've got a guitarist, not too flashy, but he just does the simple licks, and in the confines of radio or MTV world, it sort of markets what they want to achieve, and that's record sales. But I want to talk about another thing, and this is a little bit of a piggyback off you, Steve, like Louder Than Hell. I'm going to create another genre of music, and I'm going to call it stoner hair metal. There's a lot of stoner groove in this album. It's like there's a wall of fog. There is something in this album where you can just see that there's a fog of bong smoke, and it's just, the grooves are so kind of slow and dope. It's kind of really sludgy. What do you guys think? There's a
Save Our Souls. Save Our Souls is a good example of that one, Peter.
It plods.
Yeah.
I think it's stoner hair metal. What do you reckon, Joe?
Ooh, I don't know. It's hard for me to say.
I don't know, Peter. Can I jump off of that and say, instead of stoner hair metal, it's just stoned hair metal. You know, at least when I listen to stoner metal bands like Fu Manchu or Chevy, they've got some drive. Like they may be stoned, but they're not like. Whereas Motley Crue, they're way back in the chair, like, whoa, So it's stoned metal, stoned hair metal.
The only energetic musician is Tommy. All the way through, even if there's a really stoned groove, or there's a really sort of the groove is really just sludgy, you can still hear that he's ticking away. And to me, I've always thought that he's the best musician in the band, but over time, maybe I've sort of changed that opinion and thought Mick was very highly underrated, because he's, as I said, he's a different style of guitarist. But all the way through, I think he's the only guy who's actually firing on all cylinders. Would we agree with that?
Yes. Yeah. And I think Tommy
I
is
think Vince
just the
sounds amazing
sweetheart.
on this album. Vince sounds great. This is one of his best vocals, I think, on this album.
You think Vince?
Can I address that? Um, I used to have an excellent magazine collection, and I don't anymore. But there was one magazine around the time of Dr. Feelgood where Vince was talking about his dissatisfaction with his vocals on this album. And he said that the producer, Tom Werman, was experimenting with a new technique where they weren't using headphones in the studio, but two speakers that were aimed at Vince. And he said he couldn't hear himself, and he really struggled with recording the vocals that way. So they went back to headphones on Girls. And I personally don't like the singing on this album. So,
Yeah.
sorry,
Tom.
Steve.
I mean, Tom Werman. Tom Werman confirms what you say, Peter. Tommy Lee was the only guy shining light, and I guess Mick. But Tom Werman's not a fan of Vince's voice. It was a project, and Nicky, he didn't have much good to say about his bass skills either. But yeah, we'll leave it at that.
I don't really understand though how Nicky Sixx has basically written all the songs. Well, he does. He writes all the music. Sometimes he gets a little bit of help from, if looking at the credits, Tommy Lee and Vince Neil. But he writes all the lyrics. He writes all the music. But he can't play the bass. I don't get that. I don't sort of see how you can be writing the songs, but then you can't play on them. Sounds strange.
Yeah,
Well, I suck at playing, and I can hum you a song. And if you're a good guitar player.
Yeah,
you know.
Maybe. Well, that's the thing.
Heath Snyder wrote all the Twisted Sister songs. He doesn't even play an instrument.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think a lot of it is like, it goes like this.
In the long run, Nicky made out financially by selling the catalog because he all the songs.
We've got a special guest in the middle of the show. Melissa Nee joining us.
Here I am.
Hey.
Hi.
Here I am. Oh, where's my...
Save us. We're drowning.
Save our souls.
Save our souls from the devil.
Yeah, right. It'll sort of seems. I was like, Joe was like, "Are you coming on?" I was like, "Did I miss something? I got a leak in my bathroom."
Oh,
yeah.
Here I am, though.
Yeah.
So my favorite song on the album is City Boy Blues. I will say that this is the last Motley Crue album that I actually really paid any kind of attention to. After that, I kind of like, I used to go see them live, but I never really liked them that much after that. I never really followed them. It got kind of, I didn't really love Girls, Girls, Girls or Dr. Feelgood that much. But this was the last one that I really liked. And I really liked City Boy Blues. I thought it was a good opener.
Yeah, I don't mind that song, and I may be an outrider, but it sort of has a bit of a build-up. You can hear that there's some keyboards or an organ that sort of fills out the song, but I'm not quite sure if I would open with that song.
So what would you open with, Louder?
I don't know. Mike, what would you have started this album off with if you were going to do the song listing?
Darn good question here. Let me look at the track list. I only have this version of it, the music to crash your car to. I think I would start it off with, I was going to say Tonight. Tonight, We Need a Lover. It's got some movement to it, but on the other hand, it also works really well opening up side two. Raise Your Hands to Rock. No, it's a little soft for open. It might be a little on the soft side for opening an album. You know what? I'm gonna go with Tonight We Need a Lover. That's what I'm gonna say. I think with that, you're engaging the audience right away with a peppy, upbeat number. And actually, you know, as far as performance and recording goes, it's one of the better songs in the album when that harmony comes in. Tonight, that's really good. That part is really, really good. I've been down on this album a lot, and I don't want to be continually down on this album. So I'm going to say something really positive, and Tonight We Need a Lover. That should open the album.
Joe, what would you lead off the album?
I'm going to remain negative. I mean, nothing can save this album. So City Boy Blues, you might as well open it as this album with it. Yeah, I don't know what else would help this album.
Here's the thing about this album is I don't think it's aged particularly well. I mean, I think it's an album from 1985, and you can kind of tell it's an album from 1985.
Yeah, but this album, like as I said, this album pissed us off right off the bat. Like,
Oh, the
and,
ballad,
and I said, Melissa, I said it had a dark cloud over it because of Vince's drunk driving thing.
right? Yep.
And so right off the bat, you're like, do I really want to like this band? And then they come out with this. So
Yeah,
they got me back in with Dr. Feelgood. But
really, I don't know. I mean, I was kind of, they were never my favorite band anyway. I mean, they were always entertaining live. I have this cassette. I think I still have it somewhere. I couldn't even tell you the last time that I listened to this album, probably 1986 or something, like it's been a really, like it's not, Motley Crue isn't a band that is a go-to band for me, really. And I have to tell you that I probably like the first album and the album done with Karabi, the two of my favorites. That's pretty much it, But I think the other thing is that if you're of a certain age, I was 20 in 1985, so maybe when you're 20, you like something because it's kind of juvenile. They're kind of juvenile. That I couldn't really see somebody my age kind of listening to Motley Crue these days.
Unless it's the Karabi album.
Unless it's the Karabi.
Yeah, indeed. All right. We'll throw over to Joe B. Spotlight another song, mate.
Can I go with Home Sweet Home?
Indeed.
So this is what really saved the album. So you got Smoking in the Boys' Room, then Home Sweet Home. Tommy Lee does his Aerosmith thing. Who knew he played piano so well? And it took off. And this thing was on MTV like 24/7, and you couldn't get away from it. And radio didn't matter. It was MTV, and they constantly played this video. I don't know. Melissa, true that it was like kind of a payola thing with MTV to get it played repeatedly?
It's funny that you mentioned that because I heard that too, because that there was some sort of something that happened where because they were managed by Doc McGee, right?
Yeah.
And Doc McGee was kind of known for that. With Bon Jovi as well, was kind of known for being somebody that, whether there was payola or strong arming or whatever, that there was sort of some backroom deals that were going on between his company and the powers that be over at MTV, Viacom, right? That was Viacom that owned them. Right. So I've heard that, but I've heard that not just from Motley Crue, but I've heard that like in general, that Doc McGee kind of was wielding some stuff back behind the scenes for all the bands.
It was constantly on there. I think it's a very good song. It's the best song in the album.
Well, the other thing, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, I like Tommy's piano playing. I like the guitar solo. I think Vince's vocals sound the best on it. If I have to listen to a song, it's going to be this. I think that the version on Decade of Decadence is actually better. I think it's the best song in the album, and it literally rescued this album, and the band will admit it.
All right. Steve, do you want to do a counterpoint to Home Sweet Home? And then I'll throw to Mike.
Well, I will say that it's interesting people talk about Home Sweet Home sort of saving the album because, I mean, I think it was a real blueprint for what was to come. A lot of those hair metal bands after the success of Home Sweet Home, hey, we've got to have a ballad. We've got to have that. And that will probably be the second single. That was kind of the formula, kick off with a rocker, then the second single, maybe third is your sort of ballad. And I think they were one of the first bands to sort of do that formula and have success with it. It did actually only go to 88 on the charts, on the singles chart. So, I mean, it's actually not a massive hit, but I guess it's that MTV play. That's where it was actually a hit, So it got lots of music video play, and that then helps the album sales. It doesn't matter if it's not a singles, maybe not a single success, that helps sell the album. So I think that's another way to look at it too, that if you play it on MTV, then you're not necessarily going to sell singles, but you're going to sell albums. And I think it's an okay song. It's not one of my favorites, but I think it's definitely served the purpose of maybe getting some radio play, definitely getting some MTV play. And I think actually when when it got re-released or re-recorded and they also released that as a single, the '91 version, that was actually a bigger hit. I think it got to like in the top 40 charts or something like that. So it was more successful. Yeah, again, I think it just follows on too from sort of Motley Crue kind of following the rules. You know, they had a cover song and then they had a ballad, and both of those are singles. So yeah.
Yeah, I think this propelled
for
the
a,
album.
I'm sorry.
Sorry,
Oh, I
Joe.
know for a fact Tommy was a huge Aerosmith fan. So I mean, I can guarantee you he basically was listening to Rocks and You See Me Crying on Toys in the Attic and just went on his piano and did the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is the first album that went top 10. So I think Home Sweet Home definitely propelled the sales of this album. And if you're going to make it, you've got to have sort of progress. So Shout at the Devil went top 20, top 30. This went to number 7, and then Girls, Girls, Girls. So you see it's going up the mountain. Home Sweet Home definitely propelled it. And it got a fair amount of MTV play. Mike, what's your opinion of Home Sweet Home?
Well, it's interesting, but nobody's mentioned this before, but Home Sweet Home is the first Motley Crue ballad. There were no ballads on Shout. There were no ballads on Too Fast for Love. So I have kind of a cynical view of Nikki Sixx's sort of business plan. You know, I feel that Nikki Sixx kind of goes in whatever direction he feels he should go into for continued success. And, you know, in Shout at the Devil, they kind of made a hard right turn right into metal. They weren't really all that totally metal on Too Fast for Love, but they really went for it on Shout. And then on Theater of Pain, you know, they're kind of going for this more mainstream sound. Home Sweet Home is part of that. I don't remember if it was a huge hit when I was a kid. I remember the music video coming out, and I remember thinking, this is great. That opening sequence, I'm on my way. We loved it because it gave the band members this likability, and they didn't really have that before, especially Vince Neil, but I think Joe summed that up very well.
But they all hated each other in real life.
They all hated each other. We didn't know any of that. And, you know, this video was very comical, like a Twisted Sister video. And I wasn't into ballads, so it didn't really have any impact on me. But I agree with everybody here that the 91 remix is the superior version. There's just an additional little piano accent in the main piano melody. And Vince Neil re-recorded some of the vocal lines, not all, but you can tell which ones. And they put out a brand new music video that was more in tune with the 90s. It was black and white. It was a little more gritty. And that's my go-to version is the 91 remix of Home Sweet Home. Otherwise, I don't bother with the song, as Joe has been very clearly indicating. I feel it's a remake of Aerosmith ballads. And I've always felt that way. So I'm totally on board with his opinion there. And whatever, you know, whatever. Every band has tried to rip off their heroes. Aerosmith are ripe for the picking. Why not? Dare I say, why not? Paul Stanley used to say, if you're going to steal something, steal a diamond. At least Motley Crue stole a diamond. And they kind of, you know, carved it out in their kind of caveman ways, because these guys aren't a musician's band. Tommy Lee is not a piano player, but they hammered this thing out and they made a pretty decent song out of it. So who am I to criticize?
Mel, do you want to have any words to say about Home Sweet Home?
I think that Steve really hit on something when he talked about the formula, how they were the first people to set up this whole, what would become that formula of everybody has to have a ballad, everybody has to have a cover song. And you're 100% right. That's exactly what they did. They started it, they got the template, and then everybody else followed it. Yeah, I mean, Tommy Lee, right, he grew up playing the accordion. That's probably his piano skills in action, right? I mean, it's a rudimentary song, but it was catchy enough. It was poppy enough for the mainstream, and it got a lot of requests on Total Request Live here in America, if you guys remember Total Request Live. So it was, that propelled it. That's what propelled it, where it started on MTV and then you did hear it on the radio because people were requesting it on MTV, and then the radio stations were following suit. And it is what sold, I think it is what sold the albums, is a lot of people, a lot of like young girls who loved Vince, went out and bought that whole album based on that one song.
Yeah. Do you think this was the album that was the crossover album, Mel, for the female demographic?
Absolutely. My sister had that Vince Neil poster. Everybody knows the poster I'm talking about on her wall, on the back of her door. So when she was in bed, she was facing him. Yeah, that was when he sort of became a pinup girl, quote unquote.
Yeah, 100%. I'm glad Melissa brought that up. This is definitely crossover for the female audience. And I witnessed it firsthand in college and in my summer job. All of a sudden, yeah, the girls started liking the band after this album. During Shout at the Devil, they were like, ick, But and in their videos weren't very kind to women on Shout at the Devil. But yeah, this is where they definitely crossed over.
Okay. Well, I'll put it to you folks. Is this album sort of marketing by numbers? Do you think there's a little bit of a corporate element that they're all sitting around the table and they're getting out the battle plan and this is what we've got to do to get more sales? Or it's just four lads getting in the studio, bashing out some tunes and putting on a show and hoping for the best? Joe, what do you think?
If I could reference The Dirt, which I've read at least 10 times because you just it still blows my mind. According to Nikki Sixx, it was pretty much luck. He was so whacked out of his mind. He goes, I don't know how we had 2 multi-platinum albums and they both aren't that good. And they had a cover tune and Tommy Lee had this song and it got played on MTV. So according to Nikki, he doesn't know how it happened. It kind of just happened. It was lucky.
Can I jump on that?
If there was any plan whatsoever. I think Tom Werman had a plan in the record company. Okay, we got to get.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah,
that's together. Our lead singers. We're lucky the lead singer's not doing Time for Life because he killed people in a drunk driving. Our songwriters strung out on heroin. We got to do something. But
Mike.
No, he just said it. Tom Werman and the management, they saw this batch of songs that the band had put together to their best of their stoned ability, and they said, okay, so we're going to market this ballad, and we're going to lead off with this cover. And Tom Werman, you're going to make these guys sound good enough to get on the radio, because there's no way in hell an amateur producer could have done that. There's no way. Doc McGee took the football and he ran with it. And that's the end of the story. They had the best team behind them. And I am sure Tom Werman could say more than he does say about working in the studio with Motley Crue. I am sure he had to, aside from Tommy Lee, that's pretty much a given that he was the one with the energy. I'm sure he had to peel those guys off the floor on some days. I'm sure he had to physically take beers out of Vince Neil's hands and push them in front of a microphone to make him sing. You know it. These guys are lazy.
But we have to. You're understating the importance of Vince Neil. Literally got out of jail and did this album.
Yeah.
So that caused a lot of tension in the band because Vince Neil had to be sober. But the other band members are doing their, whacked out of their mind and everything else. So, and then all of a sudden Vince became persona non grata in a way. I mean, it's craziness. And as fans, we didn't want to like this band after that happened.
I'm going to do a hypothetical. So say Vince is out. He's in jail. Does Motley Crue end, or do they bring in a singer in 1985? Imagine they bring in Don Dokken or someone. How does Motley Crue go, Steve?
Well, the whole thing with this album that I find interesting is that there was a dark cloud over it. Vince is very lucky he did a bit of jail time, but not a lot. What's that album that you had there, Mike? Music to Crash Your Car to? I mean, unbelievable. Yeah. They would release a compilation album called Music to Crash Your Car To when the vocalist has killed people by crashing his car. Really bad taste. But anyway, that was released like, 20 years after this event. But, I think that I think Nikki Sixx totally would have replaced Vince if he'd been in jail. He's got all these songs that he's written or wants to write. He wants to be successful. It's I don't think Vince Neil was essential to the band. They haven't been successful without him, but I'm just saying, I think that in 1985, they possibly could have done it. They possibly could have replaced him. And
Steve, you know what the proof in the pudding is? The proof in the pudding is that they fired him later on for being late for a rehearsal. So, yeah, they would have fired him in 85. Yeah. Absolutely.
Absolutely. So, Melissa, I'll throw it to you. Who would been the pick to get a vocalist in 1985? So, who
well, I guess they could have gone with Michael Monroe since he kind of had some free time on his hands.
That's an interesting twist of the tale, isn't it?
Since his band sort of imploded.
So who was the biggest metal band in that sort of genre in 1985? Quiet Riot were on the downward slide because they had...
Dee Snider, maybe?
No, that's just too out there.
There were some up-and-comers in Hollywood. They could have mined for up-and-comers in Hollywood. Guys like Bret Michaels, Phil Lewis. I could see Phil Lewis working out really well in Motley Crue.
Absolutely. I would agree with you on that. I think that he would have been a good fit for them. Right. Yeah, I think that Vince is definitely replaceable. And you talk about the studio, that Tom had to do a lot of work because Vince isn't really that much of a vocalist. But I think that he's got the image, and definitely in 1985, maybe not now, but in 1985, he was, a good looking guy, and he had his body was in good shape, and he had the blonde hair and everything, and he just sort of he was the poster child for what was going to turn into the glam metal, hair metal movement that became so big in the 80s.
So Nikki, one of Nikki's, he's a big fan of many artists, but he's a huge Cheap Trick fan. So I know he wanted a Robin Zander. Now, don't get me wrong. He can't even touch Robin Zander vocally, but he had Robin Zander's look. And he used to play He's a Whore. And actually, Too Fast for Love, he admitted that Too Fast for Love is actually He's a Whore by Cheap Trick. He just reworked the song and the chords are the same. But I think you could have found anybody on the Sunset Strip to replace him, but he'd have to have blonde hair, I think.
Absolutely.
To go. Yeah.
And it would have done better. It would have done well in 1985 because Vince didn't have the reputation that, say, Comparative in 1990 or 1991 when Karabi came in, because they were megastars, Motley Crue. But in 1985, they were sort of a band on the rise. So that would have been the perfect timing to get Vince out and bring a new singer in, and it may have gone down a different path. So... just an interesting what if. All right, so what we're going to do just the tail end of the show is maybe just talk about a couple of more songs that we want to spotlight, and we'll just go around and then we'll do our final summation of the album. So Joe, is there any other songs that you'd like to spotlight?
Let's see. Honestly, I'd be disingenuous if I spotlight. I don't like this album, so I'm going to pass it on to the other guys. I think I've spoken enough. I hope I can state towards the end how much joy and pain, and I think Kiss is the only other band that's taken me in such a roller coaster than this band. So yeah, I'm not going to highlight any other song. I'll pass it on to someone else.
Well, that's a first in Rock Daydream Nation history. Somebody is.
No, I actually did it on the Asylum one too with the Gene Simmons
that's
songs.
True. That's true. Somebody has passed. Steve, save the day.
Yeah, I'm going to love to because one of the few people I think on the panel that likes this album. But anyway, I will say though, like I said, the first couple of songs, Smoking in the Boys' Room in particular, I'm like, oh. didn't like that. City Boy Blues is okay, I guess, but then I talked about Louder Than Hell, and then the fourth song, Keep Your Eye on the Money. Oh, that's like probably my second favorite Motley Crue song of all time. Just love the riff, the way that kicks in, and it just, for me, we talked about sequencing of the songs. I probably would start the album with Keep Your Eye on the Money, because I think it's the best song on the album. I think it's a good way to start the album. The only thing is I'm so used to the sequence of all the songs now that that I probably would be happy for it to stay the same. When I played the album, I just started from Louder Than Hell. So, on the record, I skip the first two and start from Louder Than Hell. But anyway, I think that's a great song. Like I said, my second favorite, Wild Side's probably my favorite Motley Crue song, but then that's probably number two. So I think it's a great song, and I won't talk about any other songs because maybe I'll do in my wrap up. I'll talk about some of the other ones I like. But yeah.
Thanks, Steve. Mike.
Nobody's talked about Fight for Your Rights yet. And, it's kind of funny to see Motley Crue take this, like, suddenly this serious stance. They're talking about racial violence in the United States. And, you know what? I kind of like the lyrics, even though they're clunky and simple. But the one line, Martin Luther brought the truth, the color of our blood's the same. I mean, come on, that's nice and simple and to the point. Yet ironic that this is a band that on their 1994 tour brought swastikas out on stage, but that's a whole other tour and a whole other situation. I got to Fight for Your Rights a little bit of credit for them trying to make a statement, a positive statement, about current events. It's not very Motley Crue in that sense. This isn't subject matter that they're prone to, but whatever. I'll give them a point. You got to give them a point for it. An A for effort on Fight for Your Rights. Not the greatest song either. I mean, that chorus is kind of fight for your rights. Fight. Kind of clunky, but we'll give them an A for effort because why not?
As I said earlier, stoner hair metal.
Mm-hmm.
Mel.
Yeah, I mean, Fight for Your Rights is an interesting song because I guess it is them trying to be a little bit more not talking about what they're usually talking about, girls and booze and stuff like that. So I will agree with you on that. I guess it is kind of them, but it seems like it doesn't really, you don't sort of think of them that way. You know what I mean? You don't really think of them as people to talk about anything serious. This whole album, and that's kind of, except for maybe that song, that's what kind of this whole album is, just kind of, it's, simple, mindless. It's okay, but it's, it's entertaining. I mean, like I said, I thought it was entertaining back then. I mean, Smoking in the Boys' Room, like, it worked. It totally worked. The video, everybody loved the video. The video was that video was on MTV every 5 minutes as well. Between that and Home Sweet Home, they just traded off. Everybody loved that video, and it got Brownsville Station a little bit of attention because a lot of people didn't really know that was a cover at first. So maybe it made them a little bit of money, and it got them a little bit of attention. People maybe checked out the original. But I mean, this album is just weird for me. I mean, it's not the worst Motley Crue album, but it's really where, for me, everything just kind of, although I do like the song Wild Side, everything just kind of went downhill until Karabi.
Hey, thank you, Mel. All right, well, why don't we do a wrap up of what we think of this album? I'm a little bit nervous to throw to this gentleman, but I will. Joe B.
I did not like the album when it was released. I still don't like the album. If I can go into this band quickly, the first two albums I loved. This comes out. Girls, Girls, Girls was Dr. Feelgood was an improvement. Decade of Decadence. I liked Primal Screen a lot. I got into, I think once we talked about Motley Crue, and I was actually getting more into the band's drama than the music. So I was like, okay, these guys get great looking women. So I'm kind of envious of that. I'm very envious of that actually. But it's such a roller coaster. Then they kick Vince out. Yeah, the Karabi album was good, but it wasn't Motley Crue. I liked Generation Swine. I was big I thought it was going to be like Kiss, but no, it was a dive bomb as a reunion. I like Saints of Los Angeles. I thought the final tour was amazing. And then they come back and go on tour, and I absolutely hate them for that because I bought that crappy Gravestone with all their albums. So yeah, this band has taken me on but as far as this album, no, this was for me, it was kind of like the beginning of the end of the 80s metal for me. This came out, and then Cliff died from Metallica, and then things got really depressing for me around 1987. And thank God for bands like The Cult and Jane's Addiction, and then the Seattle scene got me re-energized. So Theater of Pain was kind of like the beginning of the end in the 80s scene for me, and didn't like it when it was released, still don't like it. So there you go. And if you look at their Atlantic City show from last night, Vince Neil doesn't even try to pretend to hide his lip syncing. He's like this, and there's singing coming out of the amps. And he fell on his face also. So, yeah, there you go.
Well, Mel, looks like I've got to insert another clip of... we should have added that to our last show. We did a clip on... who was it? Jack from Grey White. And he was sitting in a wheelchair, and everyone was playing around him. But this is getting ridiculous, isn't it? Steve, final.
Yeah, my final thoughts. Yeah. Going back to, like I say, my first experience with the band and getting this is the first Motley Crue album I heard, and just even their image, I thought they looked cool, and I mean, we talked about the fact that girls wanted to be with them, and I think guys wanted to be them, it's like they had their image down. And interesting thing too with Motley Crue, they kind of, each album, they just tweak their image just a little bit. First album's kind of, they're a little bit sort of glammy. Second album, they're more metal. This one's kind of like post-apocalyptic, kind of with a bit of glam kind of look. And then Girls, they're kind of like biker dudes. And, and then, Dr. Feelgood, they're kind of a bit of a mix of everything, really. So, and they're maybe toning down the image a little bit. But, I think they've been really good at doing it with their image and all that sort of thing. So I think that's helped them. As far as actually the band themselves, this is, for me, their last really good album. I'm not particularly into Girls, although Wild Sides is like this one standout song, kind of a bit like Two Primal Scream. Yeah, that's a great song. It's kind of just stands out there. I think all the albums after Theatre of Pain, there's one or two good songs on it, but it's a bit hit and miss, really, or miss more than hits, really. But John Corabi album is not a Motley Crue album. It's great, but it just, without Vince there, with just his distinctive vocals, it just didn't. And also musically, they did change quite a bit for that album. So but going back to this album, I've already talked about Louder Than Hell, Keep Your Eye on the Money from side one. They're my two go-to songs from side one, but then side two is just everything. The funny thing about this album is the songs at the back. It's one of those albums where the songs at the back aren't in the right order. So don't you get confused when you go, oh, okay, Use It or Lose It is the last. No, it's not actually. Tonight We Need a Lover starts it off, but it's like from Tonight We Need a Lover all the way through to the last song, which is Fight for Your Rights. I just love everything on side two. It just Mick on guitar. Like I said before, I think his guitar work is great, sounds great. There's some good heavy riffs. Just everything on side two for me is great. So, there we go.
Thanks, Steve. And Mike, final thoughts on this album?
Well, I've really enjoyed hearing everybody's perspective, especially Steve's, because I've been kind of consistently not a fan of this album ever since I bought it. And on my website, I rated it as 2 of 5 stars. And I get more trolley comments on that review than actually Motley Crue reviews in general. I get more trolley comments on them than anything else, but especially my 2 out of 5 star Theater of Pain, where I was told I have a dead cat in my ears, apparently. Now, I haven't seen a doctor about that. I continue to listen to Theater of Pain and come to the same conclusions. I think the cover art is really good. Nobody's really mentioned the cover art. I think it's iconic. I think it's better than the album. I remember seeing that in the stores and thinking, wow, that is really great. And the upside down star continuing down from Shout at the Devil on the forehead there, that looks great. And then I was very disappointed when the album didn't live up to what I thought it should from that dramatic cover art. I think that the changing of the image to the glam, sort of a cross between Aerosmith and the New York Dolls, I think that was sort of a mistake. It alienated some of the fans, alienated me as a fan. I preferred that tough guy Mad Max look that they had prior. It's no surprise that they kind of did a backpedal when they did Girls, 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 and they kind of adopted a tougher image with denim and leather and dropped the makeup, with the stripes under the eyes and whatnot. At the end of the day, though, this provided them with 2 big hits. It does have a lot of fans, and you got to respect a guy like Steve Deluxe. You got to respect his opinions, and there's something valid to what he is hearing in this album that I just can't enjoy. I think the production is a hindrance. I think Vince Neil's vocals are dead. I think one thing that Joe said repeatedly is that there was a dark cloud hanging over this album, and I think that's audible. I think that dark cloud haunted them in the studio. They're trying to focus, but they have this whole thing hanging over their heads. I think that comes out in the music. It's, I think, a dour album. And although it seems to be I'm a loner here, I actually thought Girls, Girls, Girls was an improvement over this album. It was a little bit more what I wanted, and definitely image-wise more than what I wanted of Motley Crue. But I also, as a fan, understood at the time that this is the current Motley Crue phase. And the next album, they will be different. Something will shift, something will change. They won't look the same, they won't sound the same. That has been the case with the first 3 albums, so why wouldn't it be the case with the 4th? So I wasn't too hung up on the fact that I didn't like what they were doing, because I knew somewhere down the line I might like them again. As far as 80s rock bands go, Motley Crue were pretty big in my life, but other bands that I loved more didn't hurt me the way that Motley Crue hurt Joe and I. So, it's kind of a love-hate thing with them and me, and I'm currently in a hate stage with them for similar reasons as Joe. And that's all I'll say about that.
Yeah.
Oh, I totally agree about I don't like the fact that they said this was their final concert, this was the end. And now they're putting out a new song and they've got a new album coming out. It's like, that annoys me.
This is the end of the beginning and the beginning of the end. This is the end, my friend. Didn't think I'd be putting Jim Morrison in a Motley Crue show, did you? Mel, final thoughts.
So the interesting thing about 1985 is when I started listening to, or had already started to listen to heavier stuff. Thrash was a thing, and that was really where my interest was lying. I still liked some of the hair metal. I'm a big Dokken fan. And I kept sort of an eye on it, and I would go to the shows and stuff like that. But really my attention was moving in another direction. This album was the beginning of them getting to be glammy for me, getting to be more poppy and moving in a different direction than I was, I had just moved away from them. I do really like the cover art, and I did see this tour and I had a lot of fun at this show. Their shows are always fun.
Who
I even saw the Girls.
Did they play with
Girls.
Saxon?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And so, it was always a good time. I mean, I went to see them after that. I went to the Girls, Girls, Girls and Dr. Feelgood and all that, and always have fun at their shows. Not recently, but back in the 80s I did. But yeah, I just feel like because I liked the first 2, I bought this and I gave it, a fair shot or whatever, but it really was, my taste was changing. And it really wasn't meeting my expectations of what I was looking for in a band. And so I kind of checked out, although the 2 songs that you guys just talked about are the 2 songs after this that I do really like. And the Karabi album is great, but it is not a Motley Crue album necessarily. But yeah, I mean, I think after that, I just kind of, and then like Joe was saying, it just sort of seems like it's more about the image, the drama, the backstory, everything else with this band than just the music. You know, it becomes just tabloid. And I'm not really, that's not really my jam.
Hey. All right. Well, I'll wrap it up and say that a lot of Motley Crue albums are like a soundtrack to the National Enquirer instead of the other way around. So it's where the tabloid takes over. I love the first two albums. That first album's killer. I just love it. It's punky. It's got raw energy. It's got a little bit of the influence of the 70s glam in the UK because they love the Sweet, they love Aerosmith, they love Hanoi Rocks. It's a pop puree. It's got so much energy. Shout at the Devil, slight step down, but they had that sort of satanic road warrior Mad Max image. And then you get this. They're trying to compete with the Rats and the Dockins. They dumb down the riffs. It's very simplified. Sonically, there's a fog over this album, and I think it's a drug fog, and there's also a personal fog that hangs over this album. And to me, I just don't find this very palatable in 2024. There's a little bit of groove. The only groove in the songs is Tommy Lee's drumming. He's quite strong all the way through, but it's not enough to save the songs because the other musicians are sort of like seen to be 3 steps behind. You don't feel convinced of Vince's vocals. You don't feel convinced with the songwriting. A lot of the songs seem very sort of by the numbers. There's a lot of filler tracks on this. Let's face it. This album has more filler than a typical Motley Crue album. My relationship with Motley Crue, I love the Karabi album. I think that's top tier. I oscillate between the first album and the Karabi album is my favorite. In between that, I think their albums have been patchy. They've had some outstanding singles, but a lot of filler. You know, I've seen Motley Crue live many times. I saw them in the late 80s, I think. But more recently, they've always disappointed me. I think they're quite terrible live. They're one of the worst live acts. There's a lot of backing tracks. There's a lot of sort of lack of energy. I don't know. It's a bit of a rock and roll swindle, really. But this album, I think, is, you know, I don't really groove on it. I don't think it's one of Motley Crue's greatest. Anyway, thanks, guys. This was entertaining, to say the least. Steve, Rock and Metal Invasion. You can see him. Check his YouTube channel out, and please like and subscribe. Mike Ladano, grab a stack of rock. Plenty of fantastic shows. There it is. Mel Nee, thanks for coming on the show. Metal Podcast. Please check out her podcast. It is a wonderful show. And Joe B, Wasting Time with Joe, is that what's? And yeah, wonderful stuff. Please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. Tell us what your favorite Motley Crue album is. Whether, you know, you like this album, you don't. Favorite album, favorite song. One thing's for sure, plenty of shows coming in 2024. Check us out. More to come. Cheers.